MPs are crying foul over moves to end the Dubs scheme for child refugees, whilst the government claims it isn't closed.
Surrey Council insists ministers didn't cut a special deal to persuade it to call off a referendum on council tax, so just why did local Conservatives change their mind?
And Surrey's council leader isn't the first politician to send a text or email in error. We'll look at what can go wrong.
What could possibles go wrong? All that in the next hour. We're joined for the duration by Giles Brandreth. Reading Giles's CV would take us to the 1 o'clock news. But as well as being a writer, broadcaster, he's a former Conservative MP. He once held the record for the world's longest after-dinner speech, which makes him perfectly qualified for this show. Welcome, Giles.
Good to be here.
First today, it was a big moment in the House of Commons last night as MPs voted by 4-1 to back the EU notification of withdrawal bill. It just trips off the tongue. But it does give the Prime Minister the authority to begin the Brexit process. It survived the Commons unamended and now moves to the Lords after the recess, which is next week. Lifelong Eurosceptics were cock-a-hoop at the result, but not all MPs were happy. Let's have a listen to the Scottish National Party breaking into song.
Order! Miss Gibson, it's very good to hold the choir, but what I would say is, I personally don't mind singing, but I certainly can't allow it in the chamber.
Well, the Deputy Speaker getting a little angry there. For those of you who couldn't name the tune, it wasn't Flower of Scotland. Oh no, it was Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the last movement of which, of that Beethoven symphony, the EU adopted many years ago as its European anthem. Now, we did ask the SNP on this morning, but no was available. I think they were all at choir practice.
So Giles is going to sing it instead.
I'm not going to sing it.
What did you make of it?
I didn't make much of it, but given Mr Burkow's new, less stuffy House of Commons, where we're not doing the wigs and we're doing a bit of grandstanding if we feel like it, what about
clapping?
A bit of bandstanding on the part of the Scots Nats? No, not happy at all. But once you begin to let anything go, when applause is allowed, cheering is allowed when the Speaker is saying his thing, it's very difficult then to contain other people when they're doing their thing.
Anarchy could be breaking out in the Commons, you know.
Not in the House of Commons, in the Palace of Westminster.
Well,
it was quite sedate.
It was sedate, and it was, by the look of it, during a division.
Yes.
So, in fact, the House was momentarily suspended. Voting was going on, and there seemed to be rather a nice choir mistress conducting the boys and girls.
So it was
and they were singing Sotto Voce. It was very... Well, it was.
Yes.
No, they were singing Ode to Joy.
But
Sotto Voce came next.
It sounds a bit too European.
They had that in the Italian restaurant around the corner.
But is there a rule then? It is unparliamentary to break into song?
It's unparliamentary to sing, it's unparliamentary to speak in other languages, it's unparliamentary to applaud, and all these things do still happen.
I was trying to remember. Show, I think. I was
I was trying to remember when Labour MPs once broke into the red flag, but I can't remember. But no doubt Twitter will remind me.
They will.
As we go
and you can
on.
Announce it later on in the programme.
And I will announce it later on in the programme. But that's not today's quiz.
No, we'll be returning to last night's vote a little later on in the show. But now let's turn to this morning in the Commons, where the government has been asked about its announcement made in the 5th paragraph of a written statement published after Prime Minister's questions that the so-called Dubs scheme to take in child refugees is to finish, having helped just 350 children, far short of the thousands some had expected.
We will transfer the specified number of 350 children pursuant to that section who reasonably meet the intention and spirit behind the provision. This number includes over 200 children already transferred under Section 67 from France. And I want to be absolutely clear, the scheme is not closed.
Where does it say in the Hansard debate that I have here from our debates on the Dubs Amendment that we will only help lone child refugees for 6 months? Where does it say that instead of the 3,000 that Parliament debated, we will only help a tenth of that number? Where does it say that when we get the chance, we will somehow turn our backs once again? It doesn't, because we didn't say that at the time.
Exactly.
Labour's Yvette Cooper there. Giles, do you agree with Alf Dubs, Lord Dubs, who put forward the amendment himself, a child refugee fleeing Nazi Germany, that this has been a shabby move by the government?
Well, it does look like it, doesn't it? I'm a fan of Alf Dubs. He was a Labour MP, became Lord Dubs. He, as you say, he came over. Kinder Transport brought him here as a refugee, lifetime of public service. Last year, secured a great success, actually. He managed to persuade the government of the day to change its mind and introduce what's now known as the Dubs Amendment, which is allowing quite a small number of children who do not have older people to look after them, children without carers, to come into this country, up to 2,000 of them, and actually be taken care of by local authorities. It's not asking a lot, and we are still a very prosperous country. We should be a generous country, and we should do and be seen to be doing the right thing by these children. So it looks disappointing.
Lord Dubs was surprised there wasn't a time limit on this particular amendment. There was also no specific number, but there were calls for 3,000 or 3,500 refugee children to be brought in rather than 350. The timing is interesting in the midst of all the debate and discussion over Brexit. Do you think, dare I mention it, that this was an attempt to try and drop the scheme?
Bury the news in paragraph 47.
You said it.
Possibly, I don't know. It seems to me quite unnecessary. It's such a small thing in the great scope of things to be seen to be generous and open. It was such a triumph. They got brownie points for agreeing to the Dubs Amendment. Andrew and I were at an event on Tuesday, the Oldie Awards, where Lord Dubs and Vanessa Redgrave were both honoured for the work they've done for refugees. Everyone cheered. Cross-party. Indeed, David Cameron was there cheering. It was his government that allowed this amendment to take place. So I think it's disappointing the way it's perceived. But it looks as if the government is already backtracking.
Well, they say it's not being stopped.
Don't worry.
It might be a pause.
We're just sort of adjusting things as we go along. So I'm hoping that eventually Dubs will rule.
Now, it's time for our daily quiz, and the question for today is all about a debate in the Lords yesterday, when peers were discussing the shortage of vegetables caused by bad weather on the continent. Courgettes, spinach and lettuce are all in short supply. Hooray, say my children. But which appropriately named peer replied for the government? Was it A, Baroness Garden, B, Lord Gardiner, C, Lord Green, or D, Baroness Greengross? What great green-fingered names they have in the Lords. At the end of the show, Giles will give us the correct answer.
I will.
Oh, good. You know.
So the red flag, I'm told, was last sung on the 9th of February 2006 to mark the centenary of the Labour Party's founding in the Commons. Even Tony Blair sang it from the dispatch box, I'm being told.
Words, did he?
They sang it too in 1979 when they lost the vote of confidence, and of course that ushered in Mrs Thatcher's first government.
And they weren't
And
stopped.
in 76, which were on the night that Michael Heseltine grabbed the mace because he was angry at Welsh MPs singing the red flag. But I think the most famous one was actually in 1945 when Labour came in with a massive landslide. And I think they sang
the red flag?
the red flag there. I think so. I think that's the famous one. Anyway, there you go. You learn lots of things on this show, especially things you don't need to know. Yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, Jeremy Corbyn staged a good old-fashioned ambush, claiming to have evidence that the government had cut a deal with Surrey Council to avoid the prospect of a local tax increase. Surrey County Council, which is, of course, Conservative-controlled, had announced it would hold a referendum on raising council tax by 15% to pay for the spiralling cost of social care. To raise it by that amount, you need to have a referendum. But at PMQs, the Labour leader said a text message exchange showed the council had dropped its plan after striking what he called a sweetheart deal with the government. Joko has the details.
Yes, the text messages in question were sent by Conservative leader of Surrey County Council, David Hodge. It's thought they were intended for Nick King, a special advisor at the Department for Communities and Local Government. But instead, he sent them to another Nick, believed to be Nick Forbes, the Labour leader of Newcastle Council, who leaked them. In his first message, Councillor Hodge said he had been advised that the Communities Department was working on a solution. A further message says he just received clarification that the numbers being talked about are acceptable enough for him to call off the R, which we assume referred to the referendum on the tax rise. After the messages were published, Surrey's leader said there had been no deal with the government. But later, the Communities Department clarified that Surrey would be part of a new pilot scheme to retain 100% of the money it raises from business rates, which could in future plug the gaps in funding. It added all other councils will be free to apply to participate in these pilots, and the government invites them to do so. Andrew.
Thank you very much. To discuss that, we're joined by one of Surrey's Conservative MPs, there's quite a few of them, Kwasi Kwarteng, and Labour's only Surrey councillor, Robert Evans. Now, we did ask the government for an interview, but we were told that nobody was available. They're probably too busy texting each other. Anyway, welcome to both of you. Now, Councillor Evans, you were at the Surrey Council budget meeting earlier this week. Tell us what happened.
We all got there for the budget meeting, which we were expecting to start at 10 o'clock. First of all, we were told there was an adjournment till 11 o'clock, then another adjournment on the budget until 1 o'clock, when we were all still anticipating, and even the Conservatives and the cabinet members in the Conservatives were expecting that there was going to be a vote on this 15% rise in council tax and putting it out to a referendum. And then we were told by the leader, Mr. Hodge, that we wouldn't need that, and that he'd had a promise, or he was now confident that he could go ahead with 5%. But this was a shock to everyone.
So when you went into that meeting, the almost universal expectation was that you would be voting for essentially for a 15% rise on which could only happen with a referendum.
Absolutely.
The fact it was cut back to I think 4.9%, which falls under the you don't need a referendum, was in the end a total surprise.
It was a total surprise to everyone, even, as I say, the Conservative cabinet members who didn't know that this was going to happen.
In your view, was a deal done?
Well, something must have been done, because for months Mr. Hodge, the leader of the council, has been telling us there is no alternative. He's spoken to government about the funding needing in Surrey, and that the funding for adult social care has been cut, and that the budget wasn't going to add up without a 15% rise in council tax. And I think they got wind that they were going to lose the referendum.
Well, right, which is probably they would have done, would they?
Well, certainly there was no evidence that people were going to vote for it. I think most people thought they'd lose it by about 75%.
Did he indicate he'd had any assurances from anybody that he could with only 5%, if I can round it up, with a 5% CT rise, that he could fill the gap?
No, he didn't give that assurance at all. And we've been asking for information and details, and it's all been clouded in mystery and secrecy. It's all sort of cloak and dagger stuff, and he's kept the council in the dark on this.
So what happened?
I've no idea what happened.
You don't? You're a Tory MP
I do know, but I don't actually run Surrey County Council, nor do I have a seat on Surrey County Council. What I do know was that a lot of local activists, the party in Surrey was very upset about the prospect of a referendum. There was huge pressure applied to David Hodge from not only my constituency in Spelthorne, but our chairman, volunteers across the county. And we didn't want to have a referendum. We didn't go into politics as Conservatives to raise taxes by 15%, and we didn't want to do that.
But there are 10 Conservative MPs in Surrey.
I think there are 11.
All right, then 11. I mean, you could say 12, and I wouldn't be surprised. 5 of them are in government, including the Chancellor, the Health Secretary. You're one of the MPs. This was of huge interest to the Conservative Party in Surrey. There must have been some involvement by MPs at the prospect of a Conservative council proposing a referendum on a 15%
Yeah, there was involvement.
tax
We were very upset
rise.
about the notion.
So why is it not happening?
We tried to use persuasion. Well, the referendum isn't happening. We managed to
neither is the 15% rise.
We managed to exert enough moral pressure, if you like, persuasion, to call off the referendum. And I think ultimately it was a decision that Surrey County Council and particularly David Hodge made.
The deal that they say has been done is that you'll be part of a pilot that gets to keep the business tax to see what happens. That doesn't come in until 2018, my understanding, that you've missed the first round of this pilot.
2018 is only a year away.
So how are you going to fill the gap?
And in fact, well, you mentioned the 4.9% rise, but the other thing that you've also failed to mention in your piece was that the...
Well, I didn't fail to mention that because you just said I did mention it.
Well, you cut me off. You didn't let me finish what I was going to say. The proposed business rate increase was actually in the manifesto. That's something that's very clear. I think Surrey are very keen that they retain business rates because that obviously is there's a lot of business in Surrey. I think it's a huge generator of income. And I think that will help, that will go some way to helping the shortfall in revenue.
Well, do we know how much? In 2015-16, Surrey kept 41 million of the local business rate revenue. The social care bill is 560 million. How will you fill the gap?
Well, I think there are other proposals. As you've said, with the 5% increase. And you will know this because David Hodges made this very clear. There may well have to be some reductions in expenditure. I mean, that's how you balance a budget typically.
Can holding on to a bigger chunk of the business rate make much of a difference?
Well, there is business in Surrey, of course, and there is business.
Prosperous business.
Prosperous business, but it's not a solution for this year. There is a big gap for this year, starting at the beginning of April. And when I asked for information, this was what I got back from the leader of the council.
There's a lot of black lines.
Yeah, this is.
Let me just say that.
This is a letter which was sent to Kwasi Kwarteng and all the MPs, and I was asking for details of what's going on, and it's been redacted. So.
Why was it? Are there national secrets in this?
Well, I don't know.
It's only from the leader of the council.
It's the leader of the council to all Surrey Conservative MPs.
Is there a D-notice on this? Is it the Secrets Act?
What could he be saying to Surrey MPs that he won't say to the council?
I don't know. I mean, from my recollection...
you got a copy of the letter.
I know, I read the letter. From my recollection, there were
Tell me about the government's commitment to transparency.
There were no state secrets. Well, this is David Hodge. I mean, I'm not here to answer for him.
Were you not curious to know what was in it?
Well, I read it. So, from my recollection, there was nothing too sensational or things that.
But isn't it unusual to redact things when councillors are asking what's going on? There's no openness. How are we supposed as councillors to vote on a budget at a difficult time if we're not being given all the information or told what's going on?
But my understanding, there was a full debate, and a lot of the numbers were pretty transparent in terms of the picture of the budget.
The debate had been built up for 15%, which many people didn't like, and you've said you didn't like it. But the council was proposing that was what the budget figures, and then at the last minute, on the basis of some what we now know were texts that were being sent by the leader of the council, we were told it was going to be all right and that we could get away with just 5%. It's no way to run a council. It's a shambles.
According to the council finance director, Surrey will now have to find an additional £30 million of cuts in this financial year.
Well, you said that the care budget was 560 million, so 30 million is a large amount, but in the overall context of the budget, they are going to have to find these savings.
But it's already lost 170 million in central government funding.
Andrew, you will appreciate that over the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a squeeze on the national budget. Now, this has affected councils up and down the country. Every council in the country has to face a degree of financial pressure. And Surrey, I think, are doing this as well as anyone.
But we know that there's been squeeze on budgets and the government has felt it had to reduce the deficit and so on. We know all that. But it was a political decision to do that by taking 4.6 billion out of the social care system. That was a political decision by your government at a time of rising of demographics among retired people, with social care was more needed. You took that political decision, and that is surely why even prosperous places like Surrey are in deep trouble.
Well, you're right. I mean, the decision was the country has demographic challenges, as you've described, and the question was whether that commitment should be met at a national level from the national exchequer, or whether local government, local borough and really county councils should take some of the strain. And that was the political decision. I think this is in line with our policy of trying to devolve responsibility in terms of budget, and localism, devolved power means taking more responsibility.
Well, but you devolved the problem. That was how you cut the budget by 4.6 billion and said, over to you. That's what you did with it. And you chose some of the most vulnerable people to be affected by this. There wasn't an argument that at some stage the budget deficit had to be brought down and all the rest of it, but you chose to do it in a way that hit some of the oldest and most vulnerable people in society.
I disagree with that. What we were trying to do was to say that the responsibility for this adult social care should be devolved down to the county council. Now, if the government had spent the money, there wasn't going to be any more money. The government would have had to make those reductions. But I think it was perfectly reasonable to say that local councils were best placed to decide how to spend this reduced amount of money.
What is the situation now? Let's assume that we know the council tax is now going to go up by 5%, not 15%. We know that there's going to be something done on business rates coming in I think 18 months' time or so. What is the situation between now and then, as far as you can tell?
Well, there's a gap. There's a big gap in the budget because unless there's some sort of secret deal being done between Surrey and the government to fill that gap, there's going to be a big hole in Surrey's finances because 1 minute we were told it had to be 15% and all of a sudden it's 5%. And it's no good saying that adult social care should be funded by local councils. I think everybody recognises that this is a central government responsibility. Adult social care funding will increase as people get older. We know that. And more people, perhaps particularly in Surrey, and it's got to be a national government responsibility.
It strikes me, Giles, there are two things I'd like you to comment on this. One is the natural journalistic suspicion thinks here's a Tory heartland, Tory council, only one Labour MP on the council.
And even he looks like a Tory, doesn't he?
He didn't come on.
Is that a compliment?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that our guest of the day is so rude to our guest.
That was intended as a
Anyway,
compliment.
let me finish that question. And of course, it's dealing with the Tory government, which the Chancellor and the Health Secretary come from this county area, distinguished backbenchers like our other guest here today. That's one thing. But the second thing is that even if keeping more business rates was a solution for Surrey, that's because Surrey's got lots of businesses. There are other parts of the country where they don't have that many businesses, and this is not a route that helps their social care.
There's a double tension here because going back 25 years when I was an MP, I recall exactly the same conflict between local government and national government. There's nothing new in this. Essentially, the people at County Hall think they can do things better than the national government does, and the national government knows it can do things better than at county level. And so there is always this tension. It goes back literally decades. The new dilemma, of course, is that we also now believe in localism. Yeah. So that we're giving more authority, more power and more money to people we don't always really believe can do the job as properly
and problems as well,
and problems. So now there is a big national problem about this. Let's devolve it and see what happens.
OK, we've run out of time. It's an interesting subject. Thanks to both of you. It's good not to talk about Brexit.
But don't worry, because we are going to now. So
what a surprise.
So after that brief interlude, let's return to last night's Brexit vote as MPs finished 3 days debating a piece of legislation which looks certain to end up in the history books. The debate has been at times tetchy. At times it's repeated well-rehearsed arguments, not for the first time. But it's always been passionate. Here's a look back at just some of the moments that caught our attention.
The message is clear to all. This House has spoken, and now is not the time to obstruct the democratically expressed wishes of the British people.
The Supreme Court was right to make clear that Parliament should exert democratic influence over Brexit. That influence should be felt at the start, throughout, and most importantly, at the end of the formal process of leaving the EU.
Does he really think that in a negotiation which can take many, many months and be extraordinarily complicated, is it in the best interests of the United Kingdom to have to reveal their hand every 2 months?
The ayes to the right, 284. The noes to the left, 333.
All of this will have an impact on the devolution process, be it in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. If ministers respect the devolution process, then they should have no problem with the additional scrutiny that comes with it.
Isn't the truth that she knows, we know, the whole House knows that the Scottish National Party have no interest and no desire to reach consensus on this point? She knew that before tabling this amendment, so members on this side of the House will be asking, surely this is just a wrecking amendment.
It's quite clear that the Honourable Lady had not resumed her seat, sir. Being in the chair accords you many privileges, but you cannot reinterpret the wishes of an honourable member who is on her feet. The ayes to the right, 62. The noes to the left, 332.
I can confirm that the government will bring forward a motion on the final agreement to be approved by both Houses of Parliament before it's concluded, and we expect and intend that this will happen before the European Parliament debates and votes on the final agreement. I hope that's of assistance.
That is a huge and very important concession about the process that we are to embark on.
What the House wants is the opportunity to send the government back to our EU partners to negotiate a deal if one hasn't been reached.
Exactly the vote we had on second reading of this bill. If you are at all worried about leaving the EU, you should clearly not have voted for this bill on second reading. And that is the point of the irrevocable debate.
I feel sometimes I'm sitting along with colleagues who are like jihadis in their support for a hard Brexit.
Division, clear the lobby.
The ayes to the right, 293. The noes to the left, 326.
We ought not to trigger Article 50 until we have given some sort of assurance to EU nationals living in the United Kingdom about their rights.
The quicker we get this bill on the statute book, the quicker we get Article 50 triggered, the quicker we can get that arrangement in place and reassure EU nationals in Britain and British citizens overseas.
Not be voting with the opposition. I am very content with the government's current position on EU nationals.
I urge all honourable and right honourable members who have tabled amendments now to withdraw them so that we can progress the bill, start the process of withdrawal and work to deliver a deal that respects the vote of the British people in the referendum.
Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 494. The noes to the left, 122.
And we're joined now by the Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardiner. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. I mean, the government's celebrating, and no wonder. Labour put down 120 amendments. None of them was passed. You completely failed to extract any concession from the government.
I think if you look back 3 or 4 months, then what you will see that at that time, we were saying that we wanted a vote in Parliament, we wanted a white paper, we wanted clarity on the final negotiated agreement and a vote on that. So actually, over that period, the government's moved and conceded all of those points. You're absolutely right. What they didn't do, and I regret this, they didn't do what the Supreme Court had said should happen, which was that the people had decided that we should leave in the referendum, but it was for Parliament then to shape how we left.
Right.
And I think that was a mistake on the government's part, because I think it would have been much stronger if Parliament had felt it had that control of the process going forward.
I mean, just to sort of argue the point about 3 or 4 months ago, to be honest, Gina Miller brought a court case. That's why, actually, you got to debate it in Parliament. Tory MPs also demanded a white paper, which was conceded, and Theresa May had already promised to have a vote on the actual deal that's done. So I ask you again, what did Labour actually extract from the government?
No, I am sorry. I don't think that's a fair analysis of what was going on.
Right, but what did Labour extract in the government in the last 3 days?
In the last 3 days, the government has conceded nothing. But you know, that's the problem of being in opposition. You don't have the votes because you're not in government.
Yes.
So it's hardly surprising that if a government is obdurate, if a government is not trying to reconcile the whole of the country and bring it back together and simply says, no, we're going to do it our way, no matter what anybody says, then of course that's what happens.
So why did Jeremy Corbyn last night tweet that the real fight starts now? What could he possibly mean?
Well, I think what you've got to understand is that now we've got the Great Repeal Bill, as they're calling it, coming forward. We will have hundreds of individual pieces of legislation that now need to go through Parliament. And what we will be doing is scrutinising them and making sure that the government cannot simply take us into the sort of deregulated offshore tax haven that many of us fear may be the direction in which they're headed.
But you've just said if the government wants to do that, for example, you as the opposition can't stop them. What can you actually change? What will you be able to do in terms of affecting change in the government as the Labour opposition that you hadn't been able to do up until now?
Joe, we're a parliamentary democracy. What we have to do is we have to speak out when we believe that what the government is doing is not in the best interests of the British people. That's what we have done. That's what we will continue to do. Of course, you're right. On our own, we can't win the vote. I hope that there may be members of the Conservative Party who will see the reasonableness and the rationality of some of the things that we're putting forward and who will then choose in their conscience to actually vote with us.
Right.
I'm not sure that that will be the case because clearly the government does have the numbers.
Right. But Diane Abbott, Shadow Home Secretary, tweeted Tory Brexit is going to be a disaster, but then voted for it.
There's two very competing principles here. One is that, and I also believe that leaving the EU is really going to be potentially disastrous for the British economy. But
so why not vote against it then, when you had the chance?
Because there's an overriding principle, and that is the principle of respecting democracy in a referendum. When the British people have been given the opportunity to vote, it ill behoves politicians to turn around and say, we know better than you do. You're just ignorant about these matters. We're the ones who understand the economy. We're the ones that understand WTO rules. Get back in your box. We'll do it our way. If I had been on the winning side of the referendum and the government had turned around to me and said, well, we know you won, but actually we're going to ignore that, I would have been furious.
Right.
And my best judgment, which is what I owe my constituents and everybody else as a Member of Parliament, is that if that had happened, if we turned round and refused to accept the will of the people, people would have been in outrage and we might well have seen an upsurge of the sort of hatred and violence that we have seen.
That's a very passionate defence of what you did. Why did you fail to persuade Clive Lewis, a leading member of the Shadow Cabinet, and 50 others or 49 others to vote the same way?
Look, I really regret that, but I know that Clive wrestled with that himself, and he accepted the democratic principle on the second reading. By the third reading, he felt that we should have been able to move the government forward. That's what he wanted to do. He respected democracy by voting for second reading.
Sure. But he says the deal you've now signed up to will ultimately harm his constituents.
Yeah, it then went through without a single amendment being accepted by the government. They were absolutely intransigent. And at that point, Clive thought, well, I can't vote for that. But you know, life isn't simple. It's not black and white. And what we have to understand is that members of Parliament have been wrestling with these competing principles, and they've tried to do what, in all honesty, they believe is the best for their constituents and for the country.
Do you have some sympathy for Barry Gardner's arguments here?
Well, I have some sympathy for his arguments, but what amuses me, looking back on it as a former whip myself, is to see how successful the Conservative whipping has been. That because there are different views on the Conservative side as well, but only 3 Conservatives didn't vote with the government last night, and about 50 Labour MPs voted against the 3-line whip imposed by Jeremy Corbyn. So clearly, one party is much more publicly divided than the other. And it must have been curious for you to be in the lobby, joshing shoulders with Bill Cash, John Redwood, all cock-a-hoop.
All your old friends.
Yeah, extraordinary. What was it like? Did you feel tainted or you felt okay?
No, look, I don't feel that being with people taints me. But what I do feel is very sad, because I feel that actually our country is going to become more divided, and I actually think people are going to be less kind to one another as a result of this. And that deeply troubles me. I think Parliament has embarked on a course that won't just make us poorer, I think it will make us poorer, but also I think we will be less kind.
Right.
And that's really something about society that I think is very worrying.
But this is alarming rhetoric, because I, like you, was a Remainer. But once the decision had been made, like you, I thought, well, we have to go along with this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And my instinct now is that we really have to go along with this. So that means actually supporting this and going with it.
So,
and what you're trying to give us now is I'm going along with it, but in a rather po-faced way, I'm going along with it, and yet there's going to be agony down the line. A nation is still divided.
But Barry Gardner, is that why you called in shadow cabinet, though, for Labour MPs to abstain, for there be a three-line vote? Did you call for that?
I never discuss what we say at shadow cabinet.
But did you call for an abstention?
I never discuss what we say at shadow cabinet, because I don't believe that leaking in shadow cabinet is the best way to ensure that we get a full and frank discussion. But I want to pick up what you're saying here, because it is important. I understand exactly what you're saying about now we've got to go with it. That's why I voted for it. But I do think we need to try and shape it. We need to try and shape it in the right way so that those 48% of the population who felt it was wrong don't now feel marginalised. That's why I think Jeremy said the fight now starts on all these individual pieces of legislation. We've got to try and make sure that we shape it in the best way for everyone.
Except it's unclear as to how you would actually do that. Even with the big concession that Keir Starmer talked about, the vote at the end, there's no renegotiation on offer. It's as was initially promised. There'll be a vote on the deal or you fall onto WTO rules.
But, Joe, you don't think any more than I do that that is a real choice that the government is offering. The Prime Minister...
I'm not making a comment on the choice. What I'm saying is, what was the concession? There will be a vote and you will not be able to send it back for renegotiation.
Precisely what I'm saying is that actually the government is trying to pretend that it is giving Parliament a choice when it's not.
All right.
That's dishonest. And the way in which they've dealt with all the amendments during the past 3 days has been equally dishonest.
When can we expect a reshuffle? Because presumably there are posts that need to be filled.
That's a matter way above my pay grade.
It can't be way above your pay grade. You're in the shadow cabinet. But anyway, I mean, this morning Jeremy Corbyn dismissed rumours that he was planning his departure, that he'd set a date on it. He said it was fake news, to quote a well-known person in politics at the moment. But are there rumours? Have people discussed it? Can you categorically rule out that there was any discussion about a date on Jeremy Corbyn's departure?
I can tell you for absolute certain I have never been party of any of those discussions. I know nothing about them. I know that there have been rumours because they've been in the press. But certainly as far as my first-hand knowledge of them is concerned, absolutely not.
And just finally, he did say, Jeremy Corbyn, that he didn't want Donald Trump to be allowed into the UK. As Shadow Trade Secretary, do you think that's wise?
I think we have to have good relations with America. Yeah. We have to make sure that we have a good trade relationship with America.
That would include getting him into the country then, presumably.
I think as many people do, that President Trump's remarks have been thoroughly objectionable, and his policies, what he's doing in terms of refugees, in terms of the Muslim ban...
But should he be allowed into the country?
Of course he should be allowed into the country. What honours he should be allowed whilst he's here is a different matter.
That's different. It's just Jeremy Corbyn said he shouldn't be allowed into the UK, but you disagree with him on that. Thank you very much. And while we're talking about Brexit, in recent weeks, you may have noticed we've been trying to make sense of some of the words, phrases and acronyms that politicians use when talking about our exit from the EU. Many of them we don't even understand, although that isn't saying much. Here's our Adam with his third and final guide to the Brexit dictionary.
Brexit is a political blockbuster. Here's what you need to know to understand the script. DEX-EU sounds like an artificial sweetener. It stands for Department for Exiting the European Union, headed by the Brexit Secretary David Davis. 300 plus staff examining the Brexit effect on 50 different sectors of the economy while preparing the UK's negotiating position. Article 50 sets out the process for a country to officially leave the EU. Except it doesn't. It's just an outline of the process for a country to leave the EU, and it says it all has to happen in a 2-year period. And if you're interested, Article 49 is the process for a country to join again. A transitional period is a sort of halfway house between the UK finalising its departure and realising its full post-Brexit state. It's a way of buying a bit more time to sort out particularly complicated aspects of our membership. Remain campaigners like it because it's not really like leaving. Leave campaigners don't like it because it's not really like leaving. Theresa May wants the UK to have free trade agreements with the EU and other countries around the world post-Brexit. They're bespoke deals to reduce the barriers to trade, both tariff and non-tariff. For example, relaxing quotas and recognising each other's regulations. This one's my favourite because it's amazingly geeky. If the EU negotiates a deal that also affects policy areas that are controlled by individual member countries, then it's deemed to be a mixed agreement, which means it has to be approved in each country, usually by votes in every parliament. The Great Repeal Bill is a piece of legislation promised by the government which will cancel the original piece of legislation that took us into the EU in the first place. It will simultaneously copy and paste EU law into British law so that MPs can decide what measures to keep and what measures to scrap. It involves something called Henry VIII powers as well, and trust me, that's a whole other movie.
And you can find the Daily Politics Guide to the Brexit process on our Twitter page. That's at daily_politics. And if you aren't on Twitter, Joe will send you a copy in the post.
Yep, I've been stuffing envelopes all morning.
Handwritten. Well, not really. Now, you pay your council tax, we assume. So at the very least, you expect your local authority to empty your bins. It's a kind of basic service, isn't that right, Joko?
Indeed.
Well, I'm asking you, but it's what it says on the script. But the time between collections in some areas has been getting longer. Some of you will have noticed that a handful of areas in the UK now have to wait a month before they see a dust cart. Jenny Kuma's been out on one Welsh bin round to find out more.
Bin Day here in Conwy in North Wales. Recyclable waste, including food, paper and glass, is picked up every week. But a trial of 3 weekly and monthly collections of general waste is underway. People can get really worked up about the issue of rubbish, especially when there are changes to bin collections. And here in Conwy, the council is one of the first in the United Kingdom to move to a system where they'll only collect your general waste once every month. The council says it's not just about saving money, it's also about trying to get people to recycle more. The council says it's a success, with initial figures showing a 15% increase in recycling and a 28% drop in residual waste.
That's about it really now.
But it's not clear whether it's working for everyone. There are 6 adults and several pets living here. They say that by bin day they've got so much rubbish that they're burning it, despite having extra bins to help them cope.
They're full now. We've got ashes from the fire extra that are going in the winter. Dog waste, cat litter, trays. It's just that it's so full. Monday they'll be coming to collect. There's going to be bags piled on top. We have paper, we put paper in the top, and then we've got...
The family argue they're recycling everything they can. But Fiona admits she puts food in her black bin rather than using her food caddy.
Some more examples there.
In nearby Kimmel Bay, the local councillor isn't happy that animal and some human waste products can end up in black bins for several weeks before the monthly bin day comes round. He's had numerous complaints from residents. Overflowing bins, fly tipping and problems with seagulls, just some of the issues. Food waste is collected weekly, so there shouldn't be food in there, should there?
No, but you will have wrappers of takeaway and things like that. So the actual smell of food, or even little bits, will attract. They will know that. They'll go looking because of the smell.
The councillor responsible for bringing in the new service admits there have been some teething problems. For example, with helping young families access the weekly nappy collection service. But he denies there's been increased fly tipping and vermin. He argues if people recycle properly, monthly collections can work.
Landfill tax costs the taxpayer £128 a tonne. That's significant money. We need to get every recycle it out of every residual bin. And it'll take time. But I believe Believe me, you'll come back here in 6, 7 years' time and we'll be there. Conwy achieved its ambitions.
Wales is the only UK nation to set legally binding recycling targets, and they are higher than those set by the EU. Councils can be fined if they fail to deliver, so monthly collections could become more widespread as the drive to get people to be more green gets more intense.
Jenny Coomer reporting there. We're joined now by the Conservative MP, Jake Berry. He's campaigning for a return to weekly bin collections, and by the Green Party co-leader, Jonathan Bartley, who isn't. Welcome to both of you here. Now, it would seem that most residents do want to see regular bin collections. They don't want them to be scrapped. Why are they wrong?
I don't think they are necessarily wrong. I think it's the wrong approach, though, if we're going to tackle the crisis in recycling that we're facing. Suddenly, we've had this great increase in recycling rates until last year when it seems to have plateaued, and now it's falling. And we've got to do something. It's actually better to focus on education, getting clear recycling systems in place. You can look at somewhere like South Oxfordshire, where they actually have alternate collections. They do recycling and food waste one week and then refuse the next week. Because there's regularity, because people know where things stand, it works quite well, and they've got a huge recycling rate.
OK, let me get... What do you say to that, Jake Berry?
Well, I agree that actually we all should recycle more, but this is a really big issue in some of the mill towns in Lancashire and places like Rossendale and Darwen, where people have no back garden. They live in a back-to-back terrace, and they have their rubbish bin in front of their front door, under their front window, for 2 weeks without being emptied. And in fact, if you have a young baby who's going through 3, 4, 5 nappies a day, and you have got that by your front door for 2 weeks or a month, as we'd see in Conway, it's pretty unpleasant. But actually, on the issue of all recycling more, some local authorities, including Blackburn with Darwen, their original plan is they reduced the size by 2/3 of the non-recyclable bin, but still emptied it every week. And I think that's the right solution for households across the UK.
I mean, we should be clear about what's actually underlying a lot of this move at local authority level are the cuts that are coming down from central government.
They can't afford to do it.
Money rather than boosting recycling figures. And we look at
Why is
that government are huge.
You talked about a crisis in recycling. What do you mean by that?
Well, we're supposed to be hitting 50%. That's the kind of target by 2020. We've been on the up until about 2 years ago, where it seems to plateau, and now it's actually going down.
And why do you think that is happening?
I think it's because of the cuts from central government. We look at the funding for the Waste Resource Action Plan. That's been cut by about 50% by central government. That means that's money not going into education, not looking at how we can develop the circular economy, how we can use waste as a resource, how we can use it to actually benefit local communities and plough the incentives for recycling back into the local community.
Local authority budgets make no difference to people's ability or desire to recycle. Responsible people want to recycle. But actually, it is a basic service that every local authority should offer to say, look, we will empty your bin once a week. It's all very well for those with large gardens and to talk about the bins at the end of the lawn can be emptied once a month. If you live in a small house with a big family, it is frankly disgusting and completely unacceptable to have a bin not emptied for a month.
If you collect more recycling, you're going to boost your recycling rate. It's obvious. And if you don't have the money to do that, that isn't going to happen.
Reduce the size of the non-recycling bin.
Budgetary. That's obvious. Local authorities look at their budgets and say, look, if we can cut this is an extra, we can cut the collections.
They're still going around every street every week. We heard on the programme they're emptying food waste every week, so why not empty the non-recyclable bin every week? Just give people a smaller bin, but empty that bin every week. It's completely unacceptable.
What are we not recycling now? What bits are we not recycling that we should be recycling?
Right across the board. If you look at people's bins, maybe 60-70% of the stuff in people's bins on average, and it varies across the country, could be recycled. It's about plastics, it's about bottles. We need a bottle return scheme. That would be a very, very good way of addressing it. It isn't just about waste collection. It's about addressing, reducing the amount of waste, the amount of reuse that we can head into. For example, the plastic bag, levy, everyone said, probably won't work. We've cut billions of plastic bags in the first 6 months. It's worked like a dream. Now, what about a bottle recycling scheme? Let's cut the waste at source, not just focus on the waste.
But that shows if you work with people rather than punishing them, they are happy to recycle, as we've seen with the plastic bags. And local authorities in other areas are taking even more extreme steps. In Blackburn with Darwen, if you live in a rural property, they are now refusing to empty your bin unless you drag it a mile to the nearest collection point. So actually, I think the local authorities need to. This is a core service that they offer to people. People do not mind.
You said that it was nothing to do with sort of cuts or central government money, but Eric Pickles promised a fund to restore weekly bin collections, and it was quietly dropped because there wasn't enough money to fund the fund.
I think, unfortunately, Eric was too little, too late.
You could never say that.
So many local authorities.
Sorry.
So many local authorities had already changed to fortnightly collection. I think people can just about live with fortnightly collection. It should be weekly, but going to monthly is frankly absurd, and that is going far too far, and it is a huge problem for people.
It's not frankly absurd. I think the problem really is that nobody likes change. And that's why, Eric, speaking for the people, we've always had weekly, we'll always have weekly. In fact, if it can be made to work on a monthly basis, you'll have to cope with it. If you can't cope with change, you become unhappy.
Right. And there is also the question of different delivery trucks coming to pick up different types of waste all at the same time, as in on the same day. That surely could be cut or modified so that you didn't have one coming to collect the non-recyclable bin, one coming to
the environment,
and so on and so on.
There's a lot of inefficiency there always has been in local government, but you look at good models like Germany, where you've got 62% recycling rate, places like Austria, even actually South Korea is doing better than we are in its recycling rate. They have efficient systems that are clear, and one of the problems with all the different systems that we got from different local authorities with migrating populations, rapid population move across London, you get different schemes in different boroughs, so you're not clear about what's going on.
Local authorities would prefer to preserve their inefficient behaviour of, as you say, sending bin lorries of different descriptions to different houses on several days a week than affect real change, which we say, let's reduce the size of the non-recyclable bin, let's still empty it every week, let's take the plastic bottles away every week, the cans, the batteries, all of those things you can recycle, rather than take those difficult decisions of saying, actually, the way we do it is wrong. They prefer to punish their own residents and say, well, in fact, because we want to stick with our sort of Spanish practices, that we, in fact, what we do is we'll empty the bin once a month.
Wrong with doing, because it was suggested earlier that the 1 week they come along and take away the recyclable stuff, and the next week they come and take the stuff that isn't. And of course, over time, you could move some that isn't being recycled into the recycled as you become more sophisticated. What would be wrong with that?
There would be nothing wrong with it per se, but what I'm suggesting is if you're sending a bin lorry to people's houses every week, why not take away their non-recyclable rubbish at the same time?
Because you can't put it all together.
But maybe the
solution is we would know where we are. That's what people want to know where they are. It's the confusion that is.
Would that be is there something wrong with that, Jonathan Burke?
No, I mean, I think it's working very, very well in South Oxfordshire. They've got, I think it's up to 62%. It's up to Germany's level, way exceeding the EU levels because they have that regularity. If people know where it stands,
and they know which week is which week.
They know what to separate. They've got clear food waste, clear recyclables. It works.
Well, I'm glad that we've solved the problem then, and we can job done. Job done.
And take that rubbish out with you when you leave, if you could.
Thank you very much.
Earlier in the show, we talked about the misdirected text messages that landed the Conservatives on Surrey County Council in hot water.
They weren't recycled, were they?
PMQs. No, but I bet they will be. But it's not the first time that a rogue text, email or tweet has caused a political upset. God forbid. Here's Ellie with more.
It's that moment you send a text message about a certain person to someone else, but then realise you've sent it to that certain person by mistake. And you can't press cancel quick enough. Take Lucy Powell, who, while Chief of Staff to Ed Miliband when he was the Labour leader, ranted about the ludicrous, nonsensical, pretend, unreal position of the party. It was a text message intended for a select few. It went to, well, loads of people. Then there was Labour's John Woodcock, who tweeted to his 27,000 Twitter followers his sweary thoughts on one of Jeremy Corbyn's PMQ's performances. Apparently, he'd meant to send it as a direct message, privately. The leader of the tweet world, Donald Trump, doesn't seem too bothered about being private. When he was tweeting his daughter Ivanka, he was publicly proud. Just a shame he got the wrong Ivanka, a council worker from Brighton. But sometimes, just sometimes, blushes are spared. In autumn 2007, just before the Tory conference, a Conservative staffer wrote an email about George Osborne's plans to raise the threshold on inheritance tax. He sent it to Mike Hancock, the then Lib Dem MP, who is, by the way, a totally different person to Matt Hancock, who was then George Osborne's Chief of Staff and who the email was presumably meant for. If leaked, it would probably have persuaded Gordon Brown to call an early election the Tories were desperate to avoid. But Mr Hancock, the Lib Dem one, reportedly replied to sender, simply saying, "I think this is yours," and kept stum.
Oh.
How very honourable. There for the grace of God go I. Have you ever sent a message, Giles, to someone you shouldn't have?
Yes. A sweet message intended for my wife, who's called Michelle, went to the PRS, Michelle Moan, because it was the next Michelle down.
Oh, right.
And it was in that, yes, and it was...
Is that the lingerie?
The lingerie, so doubly unfortunate. Slightly intimate message intended
I won't
for my
ask
wife.
exactly what you said, but we get the general...
You get the gist.
Yes, I do get the thread of the, of the
it's
conversation.
Because, and this is how this one happened, it's the first names now.
Yes.
And you might... lots of people call it Nick. And quite a few people call it Michelle, and you can just press the wrong one, and then it's too late. You can't retrieve it.
And you can't retrieve it. So what should you do if you realise that you've sent it? You know, what would be the etiquette, do you think, if you have made a big boo-boo?
Sent in error.
That's it.
You sent in error, though, as I said to Michelle Moan, but in a different life. Things I would like to have said that to you.
Giles, that might be too much information, but thank you so much. Should we make political capital out of mistakes that are made?
Well...
From politicians.
There's an American politician whose reputation was enhanced when he sent a text saying that he had just laid the au pair. It was actually, he had paid the au pair, but he had actually misspelt it in the course of it. He'd been seen as rather a conservative character. His reputation rose as a result of this.
Right. We'll try and keep this sombre and with a straight face, of course.
It's not working.
No, it's not working, and it's distracted me somewhat. In terms of politics...
She's lived a very sheltered life.
You clearly have. You clearly have.
What about for whips? You said you were a former whip. Do you think texting would be wise if you were sending out group texts and you were trying to coerce or persuade people to... No.
No. I mean, essentially, in life, you've got to remember the great Walter Cronkite's rule that never do anything, say anything, write anything that you are not prepared to see on the front page of the New York Times. And so don't put in writing anything you will regret. And the best whipping is done, as we've seen from the Conservatives this week, by person-to-person contact.
Yes.
Making sure you persuade your people and you know them and you speak to them one-to-one.
Yes, you don't want it to appear on the front page of the local newspaper, as my old boss used to say, then don't write it. You're quite right. What about WhatsApp? Do you know about WhatsApp group messages?
Yes.
And again, people can forget that there are a whole list of people in their group.
Absolutely.
How careful do you have to be? Lucy
you've
Powell, the
got to be
Labour
very,
MP,
very
fell foul of that.
Also, the problem is, nowadays, we have things that are further down the text. You actually find you're sending a whole history.
Yes.
You think it's only the last two, but in fact, you haven't scrolled down. There's a thread. And once you get to group things, it then just grows exponentially. So say less. And just tweet, as Andrew does, from the heart, knowing a message could be shared by anybody, any of his...
And the bottle.
You are my... When it comes to Twitter, you are my role model.
Oh,
you know that?
I like
Absolutely.
that.
Really? Which bit particularly? Or maybe I won't... Maybe
no
should
need to probe.
No need to probe.
Just
too
do the
closely.
quiz.
Now, there's just time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz. You're so bossy. The question
Someone has
was,
to be.
which beer responded for the government, Giles, during a debate on the vegetable shortage? Was it A, Baroness Garden, B, Lord Gardner, C, Lord Green, or D, Baroness Greencross? Oh, well done, you've caught up with the thread. Do you have a clue of the answer?
I'm going to go for Green.
It's not, actually. I'm afraid it's Lord Gardner is the answer. I think he's Baron Gardner of Kimble, I think is the correct
Is
title.
he the son of the old Lord Gardner?
All right.
I don't know.
We'll
Not
find
related
that
to
out.
Barry
Well, you can
Gardner
talk about
either.
it later.
Twitter will tell us, won't it?
The 1 o'clock news is starting on BBC One. I'll be back on BBC One tonight with This Week. Liz Kendall, Matt Ford, Andy Parsons, Liam Halligan, Michael Portillo. See you then.
Bye-bye.